When people talk about World War II, they often focus on the massive battles, the weapons, or the generals who made the decisions. But for the soldiers on the ground, survival wasn't just about facing the enemy. It was about enduring cold nights in trenches, long marches through forests, and exposure to every kind of weather imaginable. To endure this, soldiers became masters of fieldcraft, the practical skills that kept them alive when conditions were at their worst. These weren't just military tricks, they were survival strategies anyone can still apply today, whether preparing for emergencies, camping in the wild, or learning how to live more self-reliantly. Let's break down 7 lessons from World War II soldiers that continue to work in any survival situation. Soldiers quickly learned that digging a foxhole or finding a natural depression in the land wasn't just about avoiding bullets. These makeshift shelters protected them from wind, rain, and snow. They would line the bottom with branches, add leaves for insulation, and cover the top with tarps, canvas, or even spare clothing to keep the cold and wet out. In modern survival, the principle is the same. The ground is your ally. A shallow dugout lined with natural materials can reduce exposure, and even a small windbreak can mean the difference between hypothermia and survival. If you've ever camped in bad weather, this lesson still holds true. Use the landscape to cut exposure before building anything complex. In the field, smoke could mean death. Soldiers perfected the art of the smokeless fire by using dry wood, smaller sticks, and creating hotter flames that burned cleanly. They would dig small fire pits, sometimes called Dakota fire holes, that channeled oxygen in from one side and vented flames straight up. This reduced smoke while making the fire more efficient. For survivalists, this method is just as valuable. A Dakota fire hole requires less wood, creates less visible smoke, and shields the flame from the wind. Whether you're avoiding detection or simply trying to save fuel, it's a fire-building technique that is still worth practicing today. Trench foot, dysentery, and infections killed and disabled far more soldiers than bullets ever did. The men who survived the longest were often those who kept strict routines of hygiene, even in the muddiest, wettest and, filthiest conditions imaginable. They rotated their socks, dried their feet by the fire whenever possible, boiled water, and buried waste far from camp. In survival terms, this might be the most overlooked lesson of all. A shelter and food, mean little if disease takes hold. Digging latrines downhill, purifying drinking water, and keeping clothing as dry as possible were simple but truly life-saving steps. A modern survivalist can take the same approach. Discipline in hygiene can extend survival far more than just stockpiling gear alone. Soldiers often had to make do when their standard equipment failed or simply ran out. A helmet wasn't just for protection, it became a cooking pot, a wash basin, or even a shovel if things got desperate. A bayonet doubled as a knife for cutting brush. In survival today, the same sort of mindset really applies. Flexibility and resourcefulness make the difference between being trapped by circumstance or adapting to it. If you can look at every item in your kit or your environment and think of, say, 3 uses for it, you're practicing the same fieldcraft that kept WWII soldiers alive across every theatre of war. Blending into the environment had a double benefit, It not only protected soldiers from detection, but also allowed them to hunt, gather, and move about without disturbing wildlife or alerting locals. Camouflage in WWII went well beyond uniforms. Soldiers used mud, branches, and even smoke-darkened cloth to match their surroundings. For today's survivalist, the principle applies to both security and hunting. Moving quietly, wearing muted clothing, and even reducing reflective surfaces on your gear can help avoid detection in emergencies while also improving your odds when foraging or hunting game. Rations were, notorious for being inadequate, and soldiers quickly learned to supplement them. In Europe, troops foraged for chestnuts, berries and wild greens. Over in the Pacific, they fished and ate coconuts, plantains or taro root. Sometimes they bartered with locals or used scraps from fields and farms. The survival lesson here is clear. No single food source can be relied upon. Knowing what grows in your region, what animals can be trapped, and how to stretch limited supplies can really transform desperation into sustainability. Today, learning edible plants in your local area or practicing small-scale trapping and fishing is, honestly, the modern version of what those soldiers were forced to master. Perhaps the most important fieldcraft of all wasn't physical, it was mental. Soldiers who could adapt, keep calm, and push forward despite hunger, exhaustion, and fear were the ones who made it home. They sang songs, carved wood, wrote letters, or created games to keep their minds sharp and spirits alive. In modern survival, mental resilience is still the dividing line. Building routines, setting small achievable goals, and finding ways to keep morale up can mean the difference between giving up and making it through. WWII soldiers proved that the human mind, when disciplined and determined, is the strongest survival tool of all. The fieldcraft lessons soldiers carried out in WWII weren't just born out of training manuals. They were forged in the hardest conditions imaginable. They teach us that survival is not about fancy equipment or modern technology, but about adaptability, resourcefulness, and discipline. These same methods can be applied whether you're preparing for emergencies, exploring the outdoors, or simply seeking to understand the resilience of the past. If you found these lessons as fascinating as I did, make sure to subscribe to In the Beginning for more deep dives into history's survival strategies. Share this with others who value practical knowledge from the past, and let's keep these timeless lessons alive for the future.